Hi, my name is Roy Ellis. I'm a grief counselor. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I've been associated with Threads of Life for many, many years. It's been a real pleasure, actually for over a decade. I was able to participate in their family forums and some of their volunteer training, and it's been a real pleasure. And I was asked recently if I'd be willing to do a video in regards to men and grief, and I'm really quite happy to do that, to talk a little bit about men and boys and the way in which we grieve. You know, an important place to start in any conversation about grief and men is about the fact that, by and large, men's grief is invisible. We, early on, around the age of 5, are taught that our strong emotions, especially sadness and fear, are not really to be seen, are not really welcome, are not really part of the conversation of what it means to be a man. We're around that time socialized to hold our sensitivity down, to be less interested in our mother and her care and her concerns, to be more connected with our father, and to move away from sharing and vulnerability toward independence and self-mastery and competition. So, out the door early go men's capacity to really sometimes identify with their softer and vulnerable sides. As we become men and then move into times of grieving and loss, then it can be incredibly difficult for us to express our feelings and to move into the world with our feelings, because there's a lot of shame meted out toward men, both culturally within our families and in our communities, when we show our vulnerability or what we might call weakness, or any signs that our shield and our defensive structures are coming down. Now, no one's doing this to hurt men. No one's doing this because they don't like men. It's just a sort of a socially accepted manner of processing feelings. And so men, for the most part, keep their feelings. And we're generalizing here, and I hope during this whole video that you make a lot of room as I make some generalizations around gendered pain and gendered loss and gendered grief. But I think, given the fact that in my own practice, 85% of the people who come to see me are women and 15% are men, suggests that women are experiencing grief and are willing to talk about their pain and be open and sharing and communicative with their deepest feelings in a way that men just aren't. We're not here to judge that. In fact, I think part of the problem with men's grief, and the reason why it's so sort of gone under and hidden, is because we don't really fully understand the way that men have to grieve because of the way they've been enculturated. So I want to talk a little bit today about how men grieve, and maybe contrast that a little bit to some of the gendered norms that are out there. So in order to understand men's grief, we have to think about, there was a piece of research done probably a couple of decades ago now around gendered grief and how we see men grieving and how women grieve, or is there such a thing as a masculine grief and such a thing as a feminine grief? And indeed, there does seem to be some generalized things that we can say about grief. And the researchers came up with some language to help us understand that. And one is instrumental grief, and the other one is intuitive grief. Now, with women, we think of intuitive grieving, which means in grieving which is highly emotional, highly demonstrative in terms of affect, a lot of sobbing, a lot of tears, a lot of showing with your body and with your face and with your body language that you're sad and you're upset and you're lonely and you're feeling empty and you're feeling abandoned, and you know, all these strong emotions are shown. Moving toward others, commiserating, a lot of demonstration, a low functioning. So in other words, when we're highly attuned to our feelings and distraught, we tend to be not functioning as well. We can't do as many things. We can't cook as well. We don't drive as well. We don't talk as well. We don't do the laundry and at work. And our executive functioning can be completely shut down. So intuitive grieving is that highly effective, highly emotionally intelligent and expressive grieving. And we see about 85% of the population of women grieve this way, and about 15% of them don't. on average. Now, this is the extremes we're talking here. There's obviously a rainbow. But on the other end of the spectrum is what's called instrumental grievers, and this is mostly men. And men grieve instrumentally, and what that means is that we tend to be practical. We tend to use our energy to express our grief and our mourning through things that we do, not how we're being and how we're feeling, but what we're doing and how we're using our energy and our body. So, men will tend to do a building project and go into a reno. Men will tend to go to the gym. They will make a foundation for the person who's lost. They will change careers. They might buy a new house or really be interested in having a new baby and becoming a new father, and sort of all the energy that can be put into that. Sometimes the energy can be turned in really interesting ways. There's a good story by a guy named Tom Golden from his book, How Men Heal. Highly recommend you read that if you're interested in how men grow and how they heal after distress and dilemma and loss. He tells the story of Michael Jordan, who one of the world's greatest, if not the greatest basketball player ever to play the game. And he made this very strange decision in the middle of his career to start playing baseball. And no one really understood what that change was all about until it was realized that his father had been murdered in North Carolina, and I think it was North Carolina. And then 2 months later, he made this decision to take up baseball. Why? Because his father had always wished and thought he would be an amazing baseball player and that he would be more suited for baseball than basketball. So, problem, mystery solved, why Michael Jordan all of a sudden started playing baseball. And he said in interviews that while he was playing the game and while he was practicing, he really felt the presence of his father there. Now, there's an incredible example of instrumental grieving, where one's energies and one's values and one's initiatives are all pushing towards something that memorializes and is focused on the wants, desires, and preferences of the deceased, and memorializes them and valorizes them in its attention to what they wanted for you. So that was Michael Jordan's way of sort of engaging his father's grief for his father, but nobody understood that except him. This strange decision that he made. That's a fantastic example of how instrumental grieving works. Now, instrumental grieving has some challenges as well. So for those of us who are more prone to trying to do our way through our grief, I remember my dad when he lost his mom. I remember my mother coming into the room, my bedroom when I was a kid, and saying, "Grandma died, we're going to Toronto, we're going to leave Thunder Bay and we're going to travel down there and we're going to go to the funeral." And I looked out my back window at my father and I saw him moving back and forth between the back door of my house and the station wagon which he was loading up, and he was moving like a robot. He was completely not there. I remember seeing this sort of vacuous, empty look. He was just a robot. He was just performing a task. Of course, there's no problem with that. He was in shock. He was trying to make sense of it all. But that continued actually onward until the only time I actually saw him cry that whole time, I think, was during the funeral. And he wept really heavily and strongly. And I remember being very upset at how upset he was. I was less worried about my grandmother and I was more worried about my dad. The risk in being an instrumental griever is that we are sealed off from our feelings, that we as men become detached and dissociated from our deep feelings, our soft sadness and our soft fear. And as we said before, very often men are only invited to feel anger as part of that sort of aggressive, competitive nature, that sort of assertive nature that men are invited to have. Wow, the birds are just talking out here like crazy. The blue jays and the sparrows are vying for position right now. So men tend to be given permission to have anger, to have rage, and they're not given permission to have sadness or fear. So of course, as instrumental grievers, one of the invitation is always to turn toward the part of ourselves that is sort of malnourished, or that muscle on men that isn't worked as much, which is our vulnerability. Just in the same way that women are invited to sort of move out sometimes of their hugely expressionate, beautiful and passionate approach to grief, to see that it's good to move your body and it's good to do things and it's good to make dinner and see friends and to actually engage the world at a physical level and not just always be concentrating on our feelings. So there's a little bit, it's always good to balance off the yin with the yang. So for men, the invitation is, of course, to engage our feeling states, to find people to talk to and share with, and to recognize that we're not only doers, we're also beers. We have a being inside of us, and we have soft, tender feelings of loneliness and sadness and bereftness, of feelings of failure and of weakness and of confusion, and accessing and really connecting with those can be really good for us. Doesn't mean we have to stop working instrumentally or doing the things that make us feel good, but it can really augment it for men to get in touch with their feelings. It's especially important for men to talk to their boys. And here we're talking about mentoring, and so let's just switch gears for a little bit and start talking about how men can help boys grieve. Boys these days have very few mentors when it comes to death. In fact, our whole culture really removes any kind of a dialogue with young boys about how their approach to death should be. And if they look, of course, to their parents, especially to their dad, where a young boy is going to look, he might not see anything at all. He might actually not see that any feeling is warranted. But because little boys will tend to be full of feelings until we sort of socialize it out of them, it's a real opportunity for fathers who are instrumental and who have sort of become guarded and protective of their own feelings to share with their sons that they don't have to do that, and do some modeling of healthy feelings, both doing things with a boy to help them be proactive and, like very involved with the funeral, or very involved at the bedside, bringing pictures or bringing food and doing the things that little boys want to do that'll make them feel good, but also affirming and making room for their soft, gentle feelings. Little boys will probably be closer to their feelings. They won't have fully guarded them yet. They won't have fully suppressed them into the sort of unconscious yet. So there's some education and a welcome that we can do to make little boys feel like their sadness is okay, their fear is okay, their confusion is okay, and we can answer their questions about death and grief and loss and tell them it's okay to feel. Little boys will really enjoy doing this. And they're actually very courageous and very curious about death, and they will be very open to feeling. They'll be happy to know that their feelings are not the object of shame, but the object of courage and of communication. So that's really something wonderful that men can do. Very often in our society, it's the women that teach the boys how to grieve, but the boys are looking to their dads for their cues. So I really want to encourage dads to be courageous and to step in and to say, show them your tears, show them your sadness, tell them what's going on inside. Even if that's not your area of expertise, be courageous and give that a shot. It's a great opportunity for men these days as we sort of move a little bit out of our restrained social patternings to say, hey, there's more to me than just being sort of a cold, shut down Clint Eastwood chomping on our cheroot, and nothing goes inside and nothing touches us. We're programmed to be a bit more hardy in the emotional world, but we have all the capacity internally to do that. Every single capacity is there. So I invite you as a man or as a boy to both celebrate your instrumentality, to really engage in those projects which make you feel alive and which make you feel like you're moving and you're doing something that's meaningful and grief related. Not just trying to distract yourself, not just going to the gym to forget, but actually engaging your grief in a really healthy and instrumental way, but also moving toward our delicacy, moving toward our fragility, our vulnerability, and our soft feeling world, which often gets guarded and pushed back so far that we basically hardly can access it, and instead have anxiety and anger and wonder why we're short with everyone and why we're pulling away. So I wish you well on your grief journey. Again, my name is Roy Ellis in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, on behalf of Threads of Life Canada, Canada's and the world's, if not premier support organization for people who have lost someone to a workplace death or tragedy. Take good care of your hearts. Talk again sometime. Bye-bye.